Hello and welcome to French Philosophers React, a philosophical take on the news headlines for today, September 2024. This is an AI-generated podcast and can make mistakes. Use it for generating possible ideas, but don't rely on it as an authoritative guide to the news or to the details of French philosophy. In the news today story, the family of Ugandan athlete Rebecca Cheptegei is demanding justice after her death, allegedly at the hands of her former boyfriend, who set her on fire in Kenya. Cheptegei, a 33-year-old long-distance runner who competed in the 2024 Paris Olympics, suffered over 80% burns and died due to multiple organ failure. The incident has sparked outrage and renewed calls to address violence against female athletes and women in general in Kenya, where gender-based violence is a common problem. Prominent figures have condemned the act and pledged support for justice. So what might French philosophers have to say about this news item? The brutal murder of Rebecca Cheptegei, a Ugandan athlete who was set on fire by her former boyfriend, is a stark reminder of the pervasive violence against women that permeates our society. However, this incident also reveals something more profound: the ways in which women's bodies are inscribed with societal norms and expectations, rendering them vulnerable to violence and marginalization. Through the lens of Simone de Beauvoir's work, particularly her concepts of the other and embodiment, I argue that Cheptegei's death is not just a tragic event, but a symptom of a deeper structural issue, one that reveals the ways in which women's bodies are constructed as other and rendered vulnerable to violence. In The Second Sex, Beauvoir argues that women have been historically constructed as the other, a category that is defined in relation to the dominant male subject. This construction renders women's experiences, desires, and agency invisible, relegating them to the margins of society. Cheptegei's death can be seen as a brutal manifestation of this construction, where her body was reduced to a mere object, vulnerable to violence and destruction. The fact that she was set on fire by someone who was supposed to love and care for her underscores the ways in which women's bodies are often inscribed with societal norms and expectations, rendering them vulnerable to violence. However, Beauvoir also argues that women's experiences are not just defined by their oppression, but also by their embodiment. In The Ethics of Ambiguity, she contends that human beings are fundamentally ambiguous, existing in a state of tension between their freedom and their facticity. Women's bodies, in particular, are often seen as being bound by their biology, rendering them vulnerable to societal expectations and norms. Cheptegei's death can be seen as a tragic reminder of the ways in which women's bodies are often reduced to their biological functions, rather than being recognized as complex, embodied subjects. The fact that Cheptegei was an athlete also adds another layer of complexity to this analysis. In The Second Sex, Beauvoir argues that women's participation in sports is often seen as a way of transcending their bodily limitations, of achieving a sense of freedom and autonomy. However, this participation also renders them vulnerable to societal expectations and norms, particularly around issues of beauty, femininity, and embodiment. Cheptegei's death can be seen as a brutal reminder of the ways in which women's bodies are often subject to multiple forms of violence, including symbolic violence. Furthermore, Beauvoir's concept of bad faith is also relevant here. In The Ethics of Ambiguity, she argues that bad faith refers to the tendency to deny or escape one's own freedom and responsibility. Cheptegei's former boyfriend, who set her on fire, can be seen as exemplifying this concept, as he attempted to escape his own responsibility for his actions by denying his agency in her death. The story also raises important questions about the ways in which societal norms and expectations are constructed and reinforced. Beauvoir argues that these norms are often constructed through a process of reciprocal recognition, where individuals recognize themselves in others and vice versa. However, this recognition is often based on dominant norms and expectations, rendering marginalized groups invisible. Cheptegei's death can be seen as a tragic reminder of the ways in which societal norms and expectations are often constructed to marginalize certain groups, particularly women. Finally, Beau's concept of ethics is also relevant here. In The Ethics of Ambiguity, she argues that ethics refers to the recognition of our fundamental ambiguity, our existence in a state of tension between our freedom and our facticity. Cheptegei's death can be seen as a brutal reminder of the need for an ethics that recognizes this ambiguity, particularly around issues of embodiment, violence, and marginalization. In conclusion, Rebecca Cheptegei's death is not just a tragic event, but a symptom of a deeper structural issue, one that reveals the ways in which bodies are constructed as other and rendered vulnerable to violence. Through the lens of Simone de Beauvoir's work, we can see how this construction is based on societal norms and expectations, particularly around issues of embodiment, beauty, and femininity. However, we can also see how this construction can be resisted through a recognition of our fundamental ambiguity, our existence in a state of tension between our freedom and our facticity. Ultimately, Cheptegei's death serves as a powerful reminder of the need for an ethics that recognizes this ambiguity, particularly around issues of embodiment, violence, and marginalization. Thank you for listening to today's episode of French Philosophers React. Be sure to come back tomorrow for more reflective takes on the day's news.